To talk a little bit more on the Zimbabwe campaign trail, we're now joined by political analyst Ringisai Chikohomero, who joins us now via Zoom. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
These are by-elections, but they're very hotly contested. Is that as a precursor of the 2023 elections, or are any elections in Zimbabwe now quite fiery?
Well, I think you're right. These are a precursor and they're setting the tone for what to expect in 2023. But most importantly, they are there testing the strength of the newly formed party, Chamisa's Citizen Coalition for Change. I think the ruling party is using this to test their strength and their mobilizing capacity and how much they have managed to galvanize the citizens behind them. And in the same way, the Citizen Coalition for Change are also looking to test the waters, given that they are only just 1 month and a few weeks old. So this is going to be a true test of whose mobilizing capacity is greater going to 2023.
Tell us a little bit about some of the violence that we've been seeing. Is that political in nature?
Yeah, I think the violence from Kwekwe, which really started with the disturbances in Gokwe, where the police, after having granted the Chamisa camp the green light to hold their campaign in Gokwe, later rescinded their permission. What we then saw is, even though the citizens were not allowed to gather and rally, they continued anyhow in a disorganized manner, but they continued to show their force in support for Chamisa. And this spilled into Kwekwe, which was the next day after the Gokwe rally. What started off as a calm day, citizens just coming in their droves to Mbizo and really gathering for the rally, turned quite fast into violence. And even Nelson Chamisa tried to calm people down. He had to be whisked physically by his security team. He had to try to calm people down when stones started being thrown from the periphery of the gathering. And this was when there was pandemonium, and unfortunately one person lost their lives during the skirmish. What is very important, at least in the first hours after the violence, was the police actually managed to apprehend about 14 people, and 12 of which were identified as card-carrying members of the ruling party, even though they were later released the next day. But this was indicative of where the violence was really coming from and who was pushing for the violence amongst the people who were in attendance. Clearly, the participants or members of the ruling party intended to disrupt the Chamisa's rally, which came just after the president's rally. And this turned out into violent altercation, leading to the loss of the life.
Do you see this by-election and this time as a sea change in the political landscape because of this new emergence of this yellow party, the CCC, because there was a lot of infighting. Some were suggesting that this was being funded or being supported by the ruling ZANU-PF party to put people in there, disrupt MDC, keep them busy. And so the coming out of that by Chamisa and his people changes the game somewhat, does it?
It indeed does. So what you see over the last 3 years has been a very systemic, calculated endeavor to clip Chamisa's swings. And many efforts have been done by the ruling party and also by the other opposition branches of the MDCT led by Advocate Mwanzora. And all these machinations were really to ground the opposition and leave a clean slate for the ruling party. The surprise announcement of the new party came really and caught them off guard. Hence, this response to his popularity, response to his mobilizing capacity, and response to how the citizens are really embracing the new party. It's very important to note that within only a month and a half of being birth, they've managed to really pull crowds everywhere they've gone. But what is very important to note, Peter, is the electoral process in Zimbabwe, like anywhere else, is really determined at the voters' roll and by the electoral body. And this is where the whole story lies. The numbers that we have seen, the popularity that we have seen, the mobilization capacity that we have seen that the new party has capacity and is able to do is well and good. But what is very important is their scrutiny and the technical understanding of how the voters' roll is set up and what are the current parameters within which it is being modeled or that is being prepared for the March 26th election and indeed for the 2023 election. Because this is the defining factor. The numbers that we see at rallies are good and they are indicative, but also one can hazard to say that Chamisa so far has played on safe ground. He has been to Harare, he has been to Kwekwe, where the MDC has really enjoyed popularity. He has been to Bulawayo and Gweru today, again, where they've enjoyed popularity historically. Gokwe was a bit of an outlier, but he has been to areas where opposition has traditionally enjoyed support. So what is really the true test is when what happens in the ballot and the discoveries that are being made around the irregularities of the voters' roll are going to play a very important role going forward.
It seems as if when we look at what ZANU-PF is allowed to do in terms of gatherings and being freely allowed to gather, compared to what the opposition parties are allowed, it seems that the authorities have picked a side, even though they're supposed to be neutral. And here we're talking about the police, we're talking about the courts, and also, as you've hinted, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself.
Yeah. So, you know, Peter, the electoral playing field in Zimbabwe has never been even since 1980. It's a historical fact. And the incumbent has always enjoyed access to state resources and access to even state coffers. And this really tilts the political terrain in their favor. What we have seen is a failure or an intentional abrogation of the dictates of the Constitution, of the dictates of the Electoral Act, and to go further of even the SABC guidelines of how to hold credible elections. And all this points to the integrity of the process that was going to be held on the 26th. Was the election, even though they are only one day, they are part of a process which starts from the campaigning period. And where the state institutions have clearly shown the side that they are. For instance, examples where we have not been favored with the kind of approvals that the police have granted ZANU-PF to hold its rallies, but Chamisa's party has been burdened with onerous responsibility. Whenever they hold rallies, they can't bus people. People cannot sing as they are going to the event. People cannot toy at the event. People cannot, chant slogans on their way, which is really ridiculous in terms of political participation. But we've not seen the same dictates and prescripts being applied to ZANU-PF. Recently, there are pictures on social media that show school children wearing party t-shirts and party regalia. There are buses that have been shown with people being dished out bread after a rallies. So all this which is happening in the full glare of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the citizens is a direct violation of the electoral process and what has been put in place by the police in terms of how the opposition are to conduct their rallies. So the playing field is uneven and it's not fair at the present moment.
Are you concerned, fearful that we might see an escalation of violence? The last time the ruling party was under threat, 2008, and President Mugabe got 21% of the vote in the first round, the reaction was swift, it was brutal. If the ruling party feels threatened after this result, and in the lead up to the national elections, do you think that we might see some of the things that we saw in 2008, or is this a different time and a different game?
I think we're still in the same space, Peter. I can even take you back to 2000, where the referendum was used as a barometer to gauge where the popularity of the newly formed MDC. The MDC has been formed in 1999, In February of 2000, the government called for a referendum on the new constitution. And when that did not go their way, we saw the unleashing of unprecedented violence. So it's a trend, and it will be folly for us to think otherwise and to think that the times have changed. The same institutions are in place, the same actors are in place. And I was discussing with colleagues that in as much as the show of strength by Nelson Chamisa political party is good for his supporters, it's good for morale, it's good for galvanizing mobilization, it's bad on the part that it's threatening the ruling party directly. And once they feel threatened, they resort to their atavistic positions, which is to use violence, which is to up their restrictions and their heavy-handedness against any political activities. So you're only going to see more and more of the restrictions, of the heavy-handedness, and of the restriction of political activities amongst the popular citizens.
Ringisai, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us and sharing your insights on this unfolding electoral story. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.